Welcome to Soltron. Today I want to talk about my custom Cybertron Voyager Starscream from the original Cybertron line. And at the end I want to talk about the kinds of Transformers I'm going to be collecting from now on because it's going to be a little bit different than what I've been doing. Alright, and here's a size comparison. So you can see he's much bigger than a Voyager class figure. He is now about leader class size. If you give like the Armada Megatron his little foot platforms, then they're about eye to eye. So he's very large. So here's a comparison with the what is this? The Evolution Starscream versus the original Cybertron Starscream. So you can see them with his blades deployed and how they look compared to each other. And I do prefer the original colors more than the maroon colors. I don't know who that is. Thrust maybe, or Dirge, but I do prefer this color. But it's too hard to get this figure in that color scheme. So anyway, so let's look at the details of this custom. So we can start with his head sculpt. So I did put a little sneer on his face, so he's got that kind of Starscream look, just to give him a little bit of character. And then I think you could tell just from looking at him, I think the proportions, I reworked these proportions a lot. This was a really hard custom that took a lot of tearing down and just rebuilding. So he's just rebuilt completely from the ground up. He looks a lot different than his original form. So he does have his sword blades, and these are kind of on these armature joints, which kind of got inspiration from Howling Meteor. So you can get out like wide poses like this. And the cool thing he can do is these can articulate down to his arms, so it can look like he's wielding them with his arms, and they kind of fold up in the same place on the elbow, which gives him like more striking range, which is something kind of the Evolution Starscream also kind of does. But this one doesn't require you to pull it off and put the wings back on. They all just do it all together. And I really like that the elbow joint is kind of just in the right place so that he can articulate these little blades. And then it's got, you can kind of manipulate it a little bit to get some more dynamic poses of maybe like the blades being thrust out. But I think that's pretty fun. I still prefer how he looks with the blades just up here at his shoulders. But I think that's pretty cool how he can just extend the blades so we can get some more range, like more striking distance. So that's pretty awesome. And then these are still on the original springs, so these can click back into place. The Cyber Key gimmick isn't going to work anymore because I reworked his entire shoulders. But these blades are still spring-loaded, so they can just be like pulled out and they'll pop out like that, which is a good time. So I like that that gimmick is still in place. And then as far as the articulation goes, he's got a ton of new articulation, mostly thanks to ball joints. So he does have a ball joint neck, so you get some side to side, a lot of expression there. He does have these ball joint shoulders, but they do, because of these pylons, they do bash into his shoulder missiles. But you can kind of work around that to get like some outward motion. So the original figure didn't have any of that. And then they are on like these double ball joints to get as much articulation as possible going. And then he has these ball joint elbows, which fold up a little bit more than 90 degrees. And then he does have bicep rotation. Nothing on the wrists. I feel like that's kind of unnecessary for the figure. I probably won't bother with ball joining his wrists. And this piece is just like falling off. He is a little bit incomplete. I do need to buy another Starscream to fill in like his little gaps and fill in like the gap sides here. So there are some pieces that are kind of just like placeholders. And then he does have this waist articulation, which is a little bit looser than I would like, but he can go ahead and twist his waist to get some more dynamic posing. And he does have these universal hip joints, which are on ratchets, and then make just friction for forward and backwards, but they do friction very well, and you can get a high kick and then full outward motion thanks to these universal joints. And then because his calves are hollow, he can get more than 90 on the knees, and then he can point his toes just for transformation. So he can get some pretty epic looking poses with all of this new articulation, which the original figure definitely was not able to do. So getting some really cool flight poses going. And then as far as like the proportions of the original figure, I also shortened this cockpit section because really in the original figure, yeah, of course that's going to come out. In the original figure, his cockpit stuck out all the way down to about here. It was about this long, so I made a little slider so that it can just slide up and down, which kind of compresses his waist. And I think that's an improvement from the Evolution Starscream, is that he gets a full cockpit where this guy just has like a little tiny one. So that's one place that's actually better. But I think the robot mode speaks for itself, and you might wonder like why I did this custom when we have a perfectly good Evolution Starscream. It's just or is it United Starscream? I just like the way that the old figures feel. These just feel better. They're stronger. The plastic is better. They have less hollow parts usually. But generally there's no other hollow parts on this guy except for this, and that's because of transformation. And then when I get the second Starscream, I'll probably fill those in with some extra parts. So just generally, I think these old toys are better. And I think these new toys just kind of fail because of these mushroom pegs, the cost cutting. I think this figure is actually one of the better ones, but in general, I think the new figures are just worse. And I just like the way this feels a lot better. So I highly recommend you go track one of these guys down, even if you don't customize. Maybe if you don't mind the terrible articulation, you might get over it. But these old toys really do hold up. And then he is missing his little tail fins, so that's another reason I need a second Starscream, to just cannibalize those. And you can see I cleaned up his backpack section. Usually it does stick out this far, but I made it so it can hinge down, and his cyber key still fits in there, no problem. And then he does have like some of this nice backpack, or this back detailing, but I need to fill in these gaps with another Starscream. And then this section is also just temporary, it's just a placeholder, and then all this mess here. So yeah, I think, in my opinion, this is the superior looking Starscream. I think this guy is great, but I think the old one just looks better. He just works. And then the transformation is basically the same as the original. You got to point out these toes. Hopefully my second Starscream has better toes than this guy, because his are all messed up because they're rubber, which is a thing that's actually worse. You point the toes, and then you're just going to rotate these kind of into place. You're going to use the double hinge shoulders, and you're going to like basically break his bicep off and then just fold that behind his arm like this. And then you're going to straighten out that section for the cyber key. And then his head does just stay in this position. He does have visible head syndrome, and you do unlock this whole section here, and it's tabbed into place with this. That locks it there so that he's nice and secure. And then you're going to pull out this nose cone. Hopefully it'll, nope. So I definitely have to glue that into place. Okay, so basically you have this kind of going on, which I think looks kind of cool in its own way. This kind of like fighter mode. It's a little spidery looking, but you go ahead and you close these up together. And then these will peg together, and then the feet will peg together, sort of. They're made out of rubber, so they're not great. That's the part of this figure that does not hold up very well. And then I'm just going to clean all this up a little bit. And then you get this Tetrajet mode, which I think is decent. It's kind of, because it's a custom, it doesn't really, the bits don't really peg into place. And because he's so full of ball joints, it can be annoying, like lining everything up. But you can see he does look pretty consistent, and he is missing those tail fins, which I think will improve his look. And then the underside is basically a mess because there's just like all these place holding blue tack elements. But I think that's a pretty good looking jet, especially this nice pronounced cockpit. He is a little bit gappy here and there, but I think it's worth having the excellent robot mode. And here he is with the United Starscream, and I think this one wins just because everything tabs really nicely together, and he's just a nice solid jet. Everything feels really good, but I think this cockpit is very ugly looking, and I think these giant intakes here are very annoying, and I think the version I made maybe mitigates that a little bit better. I can actually lower these shoulders. There we go, so these gaps don't have as much, aren't as visible. It like helps with the aerodynamic nature, and the wings are basically straight. And then I could also, if I wanted to, I could bend these down and make an actual Tetrajet where it has like 3 points, and then just have the tail fin come up here. So it's got some little variations that can be done because of the ball joints. And of course I modified him so he can wear his coronation gear as well. So you might look at all this work and just ask, like, what's the point? We've got a perfectly good United Starscream. What is even the point of making this? Or no, Evolution Starscream. Like, why put in the 20 hours it took to make this custom and all the sweat and frustration? Well, I think this figure and Solus Prime kind of answer that question. I just don't like the Transformers that come out now. I don't like these ball joints where pieces can just be yanked off and like things aren't even pinned in place. And I think the quality of these robots has just decreased a lot. And I don't think it's Hasbro's fault that these robots just don't have ratchets and things anymore. And there's a lot of cost cutting and visible mushroom pegs where you can just pop off limbs. I don't think it's necessarily Hasbro's fault that these toys would get kind of cheap, like they don't even pin the hinges anymore. I think it's just an issue with small Transformers in general, because even the Mini Force robots, which are some of the best robots that I own, even these have the same problems. They have mushroom pegs. They have, this guy's not a good example, but they use ball joints instead of using universal joints. And this guy has also mushroom pegs, hollow parts. I think the industry's just moved in a place where the toys are just not as good as they used to be. Not to sound like an old man about it, but I think they're just not. I think the old toys used to be better, and these are the ones I grew up with. These are the ones that got me into Transformers, and I think things have just gotten worse. So I want to show off what I've been working on if you've been watching this whole video. And this is where I'm going to go back and contradict myself a little bit. Some of these figures are so good that I just can't make a custom that's as good, like Vector Prime, Override. I think these two robots just hold up. They're just excellent toys in their own right. And then even the original Evac is such a good robot, I didn't even modify it. It's just good as it is. And then you can see the ones that you're going to see in future videos. We've got the Cybertron Defense Hotshot. We've got Mudflap, and we've got Scourge, which I think is a fan favorite. So you'll see all those in future videos. And the cool thing is they're all about the right scale. If you look at the scaling sheet, they all kind of scale correctly to Metroplex, which is also an example of something that Takara Hasbro's done really well. So I think the little figures are kind of annoying and fiddly. But when it comes to the big figures, the leader class ones, those are the figures I'll probably still continue collecting. But as far as like deluxe class figures, I think I'm just not going to collect them anymore. And as far as Cybertron, Armada Universe, I think I might just make my own figures as much as I can. So that's kind of the future of what my collecting is going to be. I think I'm just going to buy a lot less Transformers in the future, unless the quality goes back to what we used to have with figures like Evac, where everything just feels good. There's no hollow panels. Everything is just made very nicely, just like the metal cardbot toys that we're seeing. It just reminds us of a time when Transformers just used to be a little bit better. So hopefully you stayed and listened to all that, and I'll see you in the next one, and I'll see you in these future videos where you see the new customs I've been working on.